Welcome to my channel. Trapped behind enemy lines after a brutal ambush, rookie operative Cass Harper is left for dead in the frozen canyons of the Yeltrin Plateau. With no radio, no backup, and a kill order closing in, she turns the hunter's game against them, leaving a trail of bodies and coded signs only her team would recognize. For 9 days, she fights through snipers, patrols, and starvation, carrying one mission: make it home with the Ghost Team 9 flag. I can't blame them for it. Not completely. We'd been ambushed on the northern rim of the Yeltrin Plateau, near the Tajin border. October wind knifed through the passes, the kind that carries a frostbite warning in the same breath it carries dust. We were Ghost Team 9, sent to root out the last hardline fighters holed up in those stone labyrinths. I was the youngest, 30 years old, barely 5 months in country, still wearing the shine of the new kid. My name's Cass Harper, and in the eyes of most of the squad, I was just that, a rookie who should be in the back with extra ammo, not on point. They'd even joked about it before we set out. "Don't give Harper the map," one of the vets chuckled. "She'll draw flowers on it." I laughed along, because that's what you do when you're trying to fit in with people who've been in the game longer than you've been shaving your boots. The ops started smooth enough, until the world went sideways. We were halfway through a narrow saddle when the cliffs lit up. First came the crack of RPGs, then the earth-punch thump of the explosions. The shockwaves tore the trail apart. 1 second I was in formation. The next, a rockslide separated me from the rest. I grabbed my comms mic. "Harper, still up? Request sitrep." Nothing. Just static. Major Darnell's voice finally cut through, tight with urgency. "Harper, respond. Do you copy?" I tried again, but the line was dead. My radio must have taken a hit. I scanned for movement. All I saw were splintered boulders and drifting smoke. The others regrouped downhill. Me? I was alone, boxed in by terrain and unseen eyes. The drone feed later showed nothing moving in my last known grid square. From their perspective, I was gone. They didn't come back for me. Couldn't. Enemy fighters were already sealing the approaches. By nightfall, Ghost 9 reported me as missing, presumed Kia. That was the official line, but it wasn't the truth, because I was still breathing, and I had no intention of dying in that canyon. The first night was the worst. Not because of the cold, though it gnawed at me through every seam in my gear. Not even because of the pain in my ribs from when the blast flung me into a boulder. No, the worst part was the silence, the realization that nobody was coming. When the sun dropped behind the plateau, the shadows became something alive. Shapes shifted in the moonlight, and every gust of wind through the rocks sounded like footsteps. My rifle felt heavier than ever. My water bottle was already half empty. I knew the odds. No radio. No extraction plan. Surrounded by hostiles who knew this terrain like the lines on their palms. You don't last long out here unless you can vanish into the stone itself. So I did. I worked my way deeper into a cut in the canyon wall, crawling into a crevice barely wide enough for my shoulders. I used a scrap of camo netting from my pack to break up my outline and pulled a scarf over my face. If anyone came close, they'd see just another lump of rock. The night air burned my lungs. The plateau drops below freezing in October, and I could feel the ice forming in my breath. I chewed a strip of jerky slowly, forcing myself to save the rest. It was all I had. At some point, hours later, I heard voices. Not English. Sharp, clipped syllables bouncing between the canyon walls. A hunting party. They moved methodically, boots crunching over gravel, rifles held low but ready. I pressed myself flatter against the rock, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. They passed within 30 feet. One man stopped, turned toward my hiding place. My finger tightened on the trigger. Then, mercifully, he spat on the ground, muttered something, and kept moving. When their footsteps finally faded, I let out the breath I'd been holding for what felt like a year. That's when the thought hit me. I could keep hiding, or I could start moving. And if I was going to make it out, it would have to be on my terms, not theirs. By morning, I made my decision. Staying put meant dying slow. Moving meant risk. Hell, it meant dancing on the edge of a rifle barrel, but it also meant a chance. And I've always been partial to chances. The sky over the Yeltrin Plateau burns gold just before sunrise, but that day it looked like it was daring me to step out into it. My ribs ached with every breath as I slung my rifle and started down toward the low ground, picking my way along goat trails and shadow lines. Water was my first priority. I followed a dry wash until I heard the faint gurgle of a spring. It wasn't much, just a trickle spilling over limestone, but it was life. I filled my bottle and drank deep, the cold water lighting me up from the inside. That's when I spotted them. Two fighters, maybe 300 yards away, standing near a battered pickup truck. They were arguing over something, pointing at the hills, their rifles slung. One leaned his weapon against the hood. Sloppy. It wasn't part of my mission to engage. But I wasn't on the mission anymore, was I? I was on my own, cut off. And those men were part of the net keeping me here. I dropped to a prone position, sighted through the scope. My breathing slowed, the world narrowing to crosshairs and heartbeat. First shot, center mass. Second, lower, to the man scrambling for his rifle. Both went down before they even knew they were under fire. I moved before the echo faded, slipping through a side ravine. By the time anyone came looking, I'd be a rumor in the rocks. That was the moment it changed. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was cutting my own way home, one obstacle at a time. Every hour, I pushed further west, always keeping the sun at my left shoulder. I used the gullies as cover, moved only when the wind rose to mask my sound. By dusk, I'd covered more ground than I thought possible in my condition. Somewhere behind me, I knew they'd found the bodies. Somewhere ahead, I hoped, was my way back. On the plateau, you don't leave breadcrumbs, you leave ghosts. That night, I found a perch halfway up a crumbling escarpment. From there, I could see a narrow trail winding toward the lowlands. And on that trail, like clockwork, came a four-man patrol. They weren't moving cautiously. They thought this was their ground. I thought otherwise. I stayed motionless until they passed under my position, then sent one clean shot into the rear man's shoulder. His scream split the night. The others wheeled around, firing into the dark. Muzzle flashes lit the rocks like camera flashes in a cave. I shifted my position by crawling sideways across the ledge, 3 meters, maybe 4, then fired again. This time I took the leader. Chaos bloomed instantly. 2 fighters, one wounded and dragging the other, stumbled back up the trail, shouting into radios. Perfect. I ghosted downslope in the opposite direction, knowing their panic would draw more fighters to that choke point. That meant one less patrol somewhere else. By dawn, I'd found another spring-fed gully. I drank, then rigged a crude snare with paracord. If I caught a hare, I'd have protein. If not, the motion of setting it reminded me that I wasn't entirely prey out here. I started thinking less about avoiding them and more about shaping the field. Every enemy I removed from the grid was one less to block my way. Every destroyed fighting position made the routes behind me safer for anyone following. That afternoon, I came across a low stone hut tucked into a crease in the rock. Inside, half a sack of flatbread, a jar of olives, and, miracle of miracles, a full canteen. I took what I needed and left the rest. You don't strip a place bare if you want to keep it looking abandoned. By the end of day 3, I'd marked 4 enemy positions with my own kind of ink, empty rifles, boot prints going nowhere, and a silence that would make the others uneasy. I wasn't wandering anymore. I was drawing a straight line home, and the line was starting to bleed. By day 4, I knew my old unit had written me off. That didn't bother me as much as I thought it would. What burned was the idea that my trail would vanish with me. No one would know I'd fought my way back. No one would know Ghost Team 9 hadn't folded entirely when the ambush hit. So I started leaving a signature. It was small at first, 3 white scratches on a rock face near an old goat path. Anyone could mistake them for erosion, but someone looking for me would recognize the code. We used it during training exercises. 3 marks meant friendly pass this way, keep moving. That night, I used something riskier. Smoke. I had 1 flare left, red, worth its weight in gold for signaling air support, but in this case I used it like an SOS. 3 bursts, a pause, then 3 more. Anyone on my old squad who still had eyes on this sector might notice. The odds were low, but not zero. I kept moving west, always in the lee of cliffs where the wind carried my scent and sound away from the valleys. Around noon, I stumbled on a shallow cave. Inside, a pair of boots, foreign military make, not local issue, sat drying by a fire pit. Someone was coming back. Soon. I waited in the shadows. When the man ducked through the entrance, I had the M4 leveled. One suppressed round to the chest dropped him before his brain caught up. I took his map and compass, checked his pockets for comm gear. Nothing I could use to call home, but his canteen was full. That night, I set another mark. This time on a sun-bleached tree trunk at the bend of a ravine. 2 horizontal slashes, then 1 diagonal through them. Our shorthand for threat removed, safe to pass. Somewhere out there, I hoped, one of my people might see it. Might know I wasn't just alive, I was still on the job. But mostly, the marks were for me. Proof that I was still here. That the plateau hadn't eaten me yet. I didn't know it at the time, but back at Forward Base Towering, somebody had started asking questions. It began with a heat signature on an old thermal rig, just a flicker moving between rock outcrops at night. Then came a string of enemy casualties found days apart, all in a rough westward line. Clean shots, no sign of struggle, no wasted rounds. Whoever was doing it was either lucky beyond reason or trained. My name wasn't on anyone's lips yet, but the whispers had started. Could be ours. Could be her. Me. I just kept moving. Day 5 broke with frost clinging to my sleeves. My ribs felt like they were welded shut every time I breathed too deep, but I'd learned to work around the pain. I rationed food carefully. Half a strip of bread, a sip of water every hour. Hunger makes you stupid, and stupid gets you killed. Around midday, I found another trail, fresh boot prints leading to a low rise. I crawled the last 50 yards and glassed the top. 2 fighters, one on a radio, the other scanning with binoculars. Probably a spotter team. I couldn't let them call in my position or anyone else's. 2 quick squeezes. 2 bodies down. I dragged them into a gully and covered them with brush. Took their rations and, more importantly, their chalk. Fighters here marked safe routes with it. I could do the same in my own way. That night, I left a long, deliberate mark on a pale boulder at the entrance to a dry wash. A single diagonal slash over a circle. Ghost 9's field sign for passage clear, Watcher 6. If any of ours stumbled through here, they'd know. Somewhere, I hoped, Vaughn, the intel officer who never stopped digging, might see patterns forming. Patterns in the bodies. Patterns in the signs. Patterns that spelled one thing. Cass Harper is still alive, and she's coming home. On the morning of day 6, the wind shifted, carrying a sound I hadn't heard since the ambush. Laughter. Not the kind you hear around a fire, but the sharp, cocky bark of fighters who think they own the terrain. I climbed to a ridge and glassed the basin below. 3 of them were posted around a lean-to, drinking tea, rifles propped in the dirt. Behind them, nailed to a warped board, was something that made my throat tighten, a tattered Ghost Team 9 flag. Our flag. It must have been taken in the chaos of the first hit. I don't know why, but seeing it there hit harder than anything in the last week. They weren't just blocking my way home, they were mocking us. I watched for hours, memorizing their movements. The T-circle broke at noon. 2 went to check a snare line in the gulch, leaving 1 to guard the post. That's when I moved. Sliding down the ridge, I kept low through the thorn scrub until I was 20 yards from the lean-to. 1 shot to the guard's sternum. He dropped without a sound. By the time the others heard the report, I was already inside the lean-to, ripping the flag from the board and stuffing it into my pack. The 2 survivors came back firing wild. I cut left into the rocks, returning fire just enough to keep their heads down. They didn't follow far, too spooked by the suddenness of it. When I finally stopped to breathe, the flag was still in my hands. Torn, caked with dirt, but ours. If I made it back, I was going to carry it through the gate myself. That night, I used a dry stream bed as a path west. Before moving out, I left another sign in chalk at the basin's edge, 2 parallel lines crossed by a short bar. It was our symbol for asset recovered. Keep moving. Somewhere behind me, maybe Vaughn would find it. Maybe Darnell. And maybe they'd start believing I wasn't just a ghost in their intel reports. I was real, and I was still fighting. By day 7, I could smell the lowlands. It's a strange thing to explain, but after days in thin, cold air, the scent of warmer ground carries like a promise. Dustier, heavier, tinged with green where the plateau's scrub gives way to valley brush. I knew I was close, which meant they knew too. That morning I cut across a saddle that gave me my first real view west in days. And there it was, maybe 8 miles off, the faint geometric outline of the outer security fence. 8 miles. 800 problems between here and there. The plateau fighters had tightened their net. I saw them in 2s and 3s, moving like they'd been given a picture of me and a bounty. They weren't relaxed anymore. Whoever was keeping the casualty list on their side must have been getting chewed out nightly. Midday, I came across a rock bluff overlooking a dry pass. From here, I had a good angle on a three-man fire team posted at a bend. I could have slipped past with patience, but that wasn't the game anymore. I needed that bend clear for when I came through after dark. 3 rounds, 3 hits. I hauled their rifles into the brush, stripped the bolts, and scattered them down a scree slope. Even if someone found them, they'd be useless. Back at base, Vaughn was starting to sound like a man with a theory. Every hit site they logged was in a neat arc closing on the western gate, and every chalk mark matched Ghost 9 field codes. By that evening, I'd bet half the unit had heard the whisper, "It's Harper." As night fell, I circled to a small rise and took a risk I hadn't dared yet: smoke. I'd scavenged 2 more flares from the last fighters I dropped. I lit one, sending 3 quick bursts. Pause. 3 more. Classic SOS. If Vaughn or anyone else was looking in this sector, they'd see. Somewhere in the black between me and base, a figure on a ridge blinked a tiny light in answer. Once. Twice. Then gone. That was all I needed. I wasn't walking into the dark alone anymore. Day 8 broke under a sky the color of dirty steel. The kind of morning that makes you think the world's holding its breath. I'd cut the distance to maybe 4 miles, but the closer I got, the thicker the hornet's nest became. Every draw and rise seemed to hold a century. I could have tried to skirt wide, but my ribs were screaming and my water was down to a swallow. Wide meant slow. Slow meant nightfall in no man's land again. So I went straight through. First was a sniper's hide tucked into a shale ledge above the trail. I saw the glint off his scope just in time. Dropped behind a boulder, circled wide uphill, and came in from his blind side. One suppressed shot ended that conversation. I stripped his pack for energy bars and a half-empty canteen. Next was a 2-man post at the mouth of a narrow cut. I threw a rock deep into the brush to their right. When they moved to investigate, I slipped left, low and fast. No shots needed. Noise is a tax you don't pay unless you have to. By late afternoon, I crested the last real rise before the lowlands. Below me, the ground fell away in a patchwork of scrub, gravel, and the faint line of the service road that skirted the fence. Somewhere down there, less than 2 miles away, was the west gate. I settled in the rocks until dark. When the light finally bled out of the sky, I moved. The service road was quiet, too quiet. I made it halfway before headlights crested from the north, 2 technicals. I hit the ditch, heart pounding as they rolled past slow, scanning with handhelds. One beam swept so close across my boots I thought the game was up. But they kept going. By the time I reached the shadow of the outer fence, my legs were jelly. I crouched behind a stack of rusting barrels, the flag still rolled tight in my pack, and let myself breathe. Tomorrow morning, I'd walk through that gate. One way or another. The west gate looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was just the way the early light washed over the metal, making the rust spots glow like embers. Or maybe it was because I'd been staring at it in my head for 9 days straight. I waited until 0900, shift change. Less eyes on the outer perimeter. My legs moved like they belonged to someone else as I crossed the last 100 yards, boots dragging in the gravel. I kept the flag clutched in one hand, the other resting on the stock of my rifle. At 20 yards, the guard on duty froze mid-step. His rifle lowered, and he barked something into his radio. The massive steel gates began to creak open, slow and deliberate. Behind them, shapes gathered. Uniforms, helmets, the glint of optics. Then I heard it. A voice I hadn't let myself believe I'd hear again. Harper? No way. It was Major Darnell. He stepped forward, face tight, eyes scanning me like I might vanish if he blinked. "We thought you were gone," he said, almost whispering. I handed him the flag. Dirt-caked, torn, edges crusted in something darker. But the crest was still there. Figured someone might want this when they made it home. Silence wrapped the yard. Veterans who'd been on my left flank during the ambush stared like they were seeing a ghost. Vaughn stepped out of the crowd, holding a battered field notebook. "Those chalk marks," he said. "It was you." I nodded, cleared my own way back. The medics moved in, but I waved them off. "Food first. Shower second. Then we can talk." Later that afternoon, they raised the flag on the base pole. No speeches, no brass bands. Just the wind tugging at the fabric while the whole unit stood at attention. My boots were still wet from the wash I'd crossed that morning. My hands still ached from the cold nights in the plateau. But for the first time in 9 days, my chest felt light. I didn't come back for medals. I came back because the story wasn't finished, and I wasn't about to let anyone else write the ending for me.